What is the book of Haggai? Well, Haggai was written by the prophet Haggai around the 5th century BC. The title of the book is named after its author because he was holding himself to the standard that all prophets of God were throughout biblical history. If you claim to be a prophet of God, you had to be accurate, consistent, and to verify your claims through public miracles. If you failed these standards, then of course you'd have everything attached to your name thrown out as false prophecy. And if you weren't willing to put your name where your mouth was, then they wouldn't even entertain you as being a prophet at all, let alone your word being God's. Now, the historical period of this book is important because it was during the time of the writings of the book of Ezra and before the writing of Nehemiah. Haggai, along with those who first returned from exile in Babylon about 70 years in the past, were of course exempt from Israel's borders. Their ancestors were given centuries of second chances to recognize what they're doing was ultimately wrong, but when it reached the point where they weren't even apologizing for it anymore, that's when judgment came. The next generation was given a promise that they'd return to the land after 70 years, and Ezra was the first one to lead that restoration project. Their goal was the rebuilding of the temple after it was destroyed, and Haggai's job was to remind Israel that God hadn't forsaken them. They would see this promise fulfilled, as well as a restored relationship with the family of David through the now sitting governor and representative of the Persian Empire, Zerubbabel. Now, this is a book of prophecy, so while a lot of history is contained in it, it's intended to be read as if God is speaking through Haggai as the spokesman or the middleman of this message. And the reason why we would consider that as such is because Haggai verified himself as a prophet of God by passing the same standard as the prophet Moses. He was accurate in the information he reported, he was consistent about the nature of God. He verified his accounts with public miracles, and most specifically, saw predictions of the future that were ultimately going to come true. And it's also worth noting that the most important prophecy of Haggai is actually the answer to a common objection to Jesus of Nazareth being the Messiah. The family line of David was cursed during the reign of Jeconiah, who is also known as Coniah or Jehoiachin in the books of Kings. And the curse essentially stated that he would never have one of his descendants sitting on the throne of Israel ever again. While the literal line of David sitting on the throne has ended since their exile in Babylon, non-Messianic Jews claim that Jesus' family tie to Jeconiah through his father Joseph in Matthew chapter 1 would disqualify him as the eternal king of Israel. The two main problems with this is that this curse was removed in the book of Haggai and forgiven directly to Zerubbabel, who is also an ancestor to Joseph, and also note that the virgin birth also means that Jesus is not biologically tied to Joseph or Jeconiah's curse. Mary and Joseph were both descendants of King David, but only Joseph was through that cursed line. That's why the book of Haggai is something important, not just for ethnic Hebrews, but also for Christians.